I'm thankful that Dr. Mitri, you're beginning with theologians because I feel like as a theologian, we're never considered that important. But to begin this conference with theological voices, I'm so honored, so thank you so much. Much of my talk will be based on my newest book, When God Became White, and I was honored that Dr. Mitri Rahab and Dr. Kwaprilang were able to endorse the book. I begin the book by saying everything is connected to race. I never thought of that until I was writing the book. I knew the importance of how race plays out in the world and in the theological discussion and reflection, but it was while I was writing the book that I really felt everything is connected to race. So let me begin by talking about white supremacy. If you live in the States, it may be more prominent than in other places around the world. I was born in Korea, but I was raised in Canada. So I did all my education from kindergarten all the way up to my PhD in Canada. And yes, racism was present, but it's a little different from what you experience in the US. And the white supremacy is a little different. So if you live in the US, it becomes more prominent. So white supremacy is a concept that identifies white people and white culture as normal and superior, even if they claim people of color as brothers and sisters in Christ. So we, and many of us in the field of religion or in Christianity, we talk about being, brothers and sisters, but this white supremacy plays out. So white complicity with racism isn't a matter of melanin, but it's a matter of power and who maintains power. Other nations have different dynamics, whether society is stratified according to class, gender, or religion. Communities tend to put power in the hands of a few to the detriment of many. In the US, power runs along skin color, and white people have the most influence, power, and agency. White people's concern is prioritized and made more important than others. White people's issues are protected way more than people of color, and laws are created to protect them. So when we see how this is being played out in the US, on the global scale, we see it being played out now in Gaza. So history demonstrates that racism doesn't go away, it just adapts. We see how racism to different contexts and cultures. We see how racism is protecting others while it allows the killing of the Palestinians. We see the devastation that white supremacy does to societies and groups of people. White supremacy is dangerous, oppressive, and it costs lives. No person of any race or ethnicity has a biological or spiritual claim to being better than anyone else. Race has served to separate society into different levels for the benefit of a few people who have been defined as white, to the misfortune of anyone considered non-white or of color. Although race is something imagined, its effects are real. And we see what is being played out in Israel and in Palestine according to who gets to be claimed white and who are claimed as people of color. Society has constructed the category of race based on perceptions of different skin colors. We have created an inequitable social and economic relationship that is structured and reproduced through skin color, class, gender, and nation. So as we're thinking about what race does, then we have to consider the concept of whiteness. And we cannot get rid of racism until we tackle this whole notion of whiteness that goes beyond skin color of who is classified as white, because then it affects all of these other categories of class, country, gender, sexuality, etc., etc. One of my other books is called Intersectional Theology that I co-wrote with Susan Shaw. And in that book, we discuss how all these social justice issues intersect. So whether it be racial justice, gender justice, climate injustice, economic justice, these are all intersecting injustices and realities. So if you're going to tackle one, you are actually tackling all the other issues at the same time. So when we're thinking about race, it is connected to gender, climate, economic, sexuality, education, etc. So this concept of whiteness is a learned behavior that is multidimensional, complex, extensive, and systematic, which then becomes a very powerful tool for white people. Whiteness is not just about the color of our skin, but it is about ideas based on beliefs, values, attitudes, with an unequal distribution of power, influence, and privilege based on skin color. It really involves how the powerful determine who has the privilege of being called white and who does not, and as a result, push them down the ladder of hierarchy. So what we see happening in Palestine, this concept of whiteness is allowing this to happen, where the life of one white person is valued way over another person who is not white. So as we think about these concepts of race, racism, whiteness, then you ask yourselves, well, what has this got to do with theology? What does this have to do with imagining who God is in the midst of genocide? Well, when we think about rethinking God, around 85% of the world's population is religious. That means that the majority of the world believes in some higher or divine power that has created the world and everything in it. There are many world religions, but for now, let's focus on Christianity. In the Christian faith, we have taught and implemented and worshiped a white male God. And you may think, did we really? But if you look at all Christian art, most of it will be depicting a white male Jesus, which is removed from the Palestinian Jesus. And so it perpetuates this whiteness. And if we claim that Jesus is the Son of God, then we portray this whiteness upon God. And if you read theology and you come across Mary Daly, she will say, if God is male, then the male is God. So this whiteness, if we apply it to God, then it legitimizes all this racism, white supremacy, whiteness that is happening and allowing the genocide and the apartheid and settler colonialism that is happening in Palestine. It is interconnected. And so if you are going to stop this form of genocide and apartheid and settler colonialism, these terms that the Palestinian Christians and theologians have been using for so long, and then the Western scholars who get so uncomfortable when they hear these terms, we still have to tackle this. Many of us have heard this morning about the letter that Dr. Mitri circulated after SBL sent the letter out. And so many of us sitting in this room were trying to circulate it to other scholars in the US and beyond to get them to sign it. And the response I got was, we're not comfortable with the word apartheid or settler colonialism or genocide. But we have to name it as it is. The Christian Palestinians have really given us words and courage to claim what is happening and name it for what it is. And so when we continue to talk about a God who is male and white, it will continue to allow such atrocities to continue to happen in Gaza. So when I think about this, and during the conference in October in Palestine that Dr. Mitri had organized, Reverend Otis Moss was the preacher there. And I told him about the book, and his response was, he gets it all the time. If he talks about a black Jesus, people, they're uncomfortable with it. But once he challenges the churches to put a portrait of a black Jesus, then they just turn him around and they say, we cannot do that. People get uncomfortable, but we do have to challenge it. So as we think about who God is in the midst of this genocide, the language that I keep turning to is the language of the Spirit, which is biblical. You see it in the Hebrew scriptures and you see it in the New Testament, the word ruha, and then the New Testament, pneuma. I think because racism and white supremacy and whiteness perpetuates this racialized and a gendered God, which then impacts our own behavior because it gives this construct, I think we really need to move away from the gendered and the racialized understanding of God and move towards a non-gendered and non-racialized understanding of who God is. So in my theological journey, and it continues to go on, I think the language that we use, and it's all just metaphors, because these words are not who God is, they just point us towards God. I think sometimes in the theological world and in the Christian churches, we think when we use terms like Father, Lord, Master, and King, we think that is who God is. But we have to remind ourselves these are only mere metaphors to help us understand. So we have to move away from these terms that perpetuate colonialism, that perpetuate this maleness and patriarchy, and allows war and genocide to happen, and move towards these non-gendered and non-racialized words. So I think if we can use terms like ruha and pneuma or spirit language, and then I use my own Asian terminology and use and embrace the concept of chi, which is a more embodied understanding of the spirit, because I think in the Western world, the spirit language has been associated with Western male theology, which is more of a philosophical understanding of the spirit, a spirit out there that just allows you to skip over the spirit. But if you use other languages and other world religions' understanding of the spirit, which is more embodied understanding, then we can recognize that the Spirit of God is in all of us. And if the Spirit of God is in Africans and South Americans and Asians and in Palestinians and around everybody around the world, then it becomes so much easier to embrace this theology that goes against genocide, against apartheid, against settler colonialism. Thank you.